Hello and welcome to a new video from Scenics. My name is Victor. Today I'm going to show you how to build the Age of Empires town center. I started building terrain and dioramas in the middle of the pandemic as a pandemic hobby, and the Age of Empires building was the one that I wanted to build. However, at that time I was not able to do it. I'm hoping that the skills that I've acquired over the last 2 years will allow me to create a satisfactory result. So, let's see what comes out. Because this is quite a complex building, I've decided to draw a one-to-one schematic of it. I did the side and top views and I made sure that the scale is appropriate for 28mm minifigures. If you're interested in these drawings, I've uploaded a scan of them on hurduscenics.com. You can get a link in the description of this video. So without further ado, let's get started and build something. The first thing I'm going to do is use a metal brush to create wood texture on these pieces of foam that I've cut before. Most of the pieces are either 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch. The length varies, but I've cut all of them to be at least 7 to 8 inches. The floor of the main building is 6 by 6 inches, and with the vertical poles is going to be 7 by 7. You see here I'm attaching some 1/4 inch by 1/2 inch pieces to the sides of these flooring pieces, and that's actually a big mistake. Later on I've realized the mistake and I had to rip them off and replace them with beams that are 1/4 inch by I'm sorry, not 1/4 inch, but 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. I did not realize that and I had a bad start to this project. But it's not a big deal because hot glue can be easily removed, especially from foam. Once I create the wood texture on all the sides, I cut the flooring in individual pieces and glue them on the board that I've created before. I like to do this because it looks more realistic and the gaps in between each piece of tile looks quite amazing. It takes a bit to glue all these pieces together, but the result will be much better than if you wouldn't do it. On the underside of the main building, I just drew the tiles using a ruler and a pen. I didn't think it would be necessary to have a lot of details. But the next big thing that we have to do with the flooring is to cut the place where the stairs will go. You can see on the drawing that I've made, there is an area that will have to be cut. The side walls are symmetrical and identical, so you can cut 4 pieces of the same size, and the easiest way I found is to draw the pattern on a piece of paper, then attach the paper with painter's tape to the foam. With a bit of patience you can cut these pieces and they will all look the same. Once you score a bit the surface, you can remove the pattern and then slowly using a hobby knife kind of cut deeper and deeper until you punch all the way through the foam. I recommend going in multiple passes instead of trying to do one cut through the entire foam. If you do that, you might actually break the piece and the results will not be very straight. I mentioned in the beginning of the video that I attached the wrong parts to the side of the flooring, so here I'm ripping them off and replacing them with beams that are 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch. Before I attach them, I make sure that I'm using the metal brush to create a wood texture on the pieces, because once attached it becomes a bit harder to do that. You can still do it, and if you forget, don't worry about it, but I do recommend trying to do it before gluing the pieces to the main board. We're starting to get a feel of how the building will look like. Here I'm attaching the side poles to each of the walls that I've cut before using the paper template. And then I'm going to attach also all the details that you see on the side of the building, such as the angled beams and then the frames of the windows. I love creating mitered corners for all my windows, and even though most people will probably not notice it given the scale, I do find it quite satisfying to try to create all those 45-degree angles on such a small scale. So for every window in this building, I've created a mitered corner. Here I'm just following the schematic that I've done before. I'm creating the details, the angled beams, and everything that was represented in the original Age of Empires game. So I'm trying to create, maybe not realistic, but a matching replica of the building in the game. We're done with the sides of the building. Now it's time to work on the roof. First of all, we're going to create a frame that acts as a base for the roof because we want the roof to be removable. I want this building to be usable in 28mm games. So if I want to use it for, let's say, a game of D&D or something similar, I can put characters and miniatures inside it. Just like I did for the windows, I'm going to create mitered corners for all these pieces that go and form the base of the roof. The roof walls are made from the same pieces that I used to create the main walls of the building. The only difference is that I'm cutting them at an angle to create the roof slope. Again, because this building is symmetrical, we need to create 4 of each piece that we're doing. Sometimes even 8 depending on what it is. This part is not necessarily important and probably no one will see it, but I wanted to create a bit of reinforcement in the roof. I was not sure if it will be strong enough to not break easily, so I'm creating a little frame that will hold the slanted pieces of foam on which I'm going to glue shingles. This is my first attempt at building the roof, and while I built it and it looked decent, you will see later on I've decided to redo it fully. I was not happy with the size of the shingles and I totally forgot to create an overhang. I think this roof at the end turned out pretty okay, but I do think that the second iteration of it looks more realistic, and I'm much happier with it. However, I've decided to show you that making mistakes is totally fine, and sometimes you can put a few hours of work into something and you just have to redo it. Here you can see I'm following a similar pattern that you'll see later. I'm just attaching the shingles with hot glue, and I've placed a few horizontal angled pieces to have support for gluing things on. But well, it didn't turn out okay. The stilts for the main building are pretty straightforward. It's just 9 vertical poles with a little square on the bottom. Just place them in every corner and then place everything else in a symmetrical way with a centerpiece. At this point I was done with the main building, at least before deciding to redo the roof. So I've decided to build, I'm not even sure what those side pieces are. I'm gonna call them maybe pergolas or canopies. But anyway, the two side buildings that you see in the game. Here I'm building a frame for the roof first, and then on that I'm going to follow a similar pattern to the roof that I did for the main building. Again, I was worried that the frame will not be strong enough, so I'm adding a few reinforcing pieces. They will also make this canopy look a bit better, and I think these are more visible than the other roof. I didn't have to redo the roof of the canopies because I've decided to cut those slanted pieces much thinner. That was one of the big mistakes on the main roof. So here I'm cutting very thin pieces, as thin as I can do it with my foam cutter. And notice I'm actually leaving space for an overhang, with something that I haven't done on the main building. At this point I still haven't cut and redid the main building. But I'm using this as an exercise to determine if I like how it looks before redoing the whole thing there. here it is, maybe the moment that you've been waiting for. I'm cutting all the shingles and all the slanted big pieces that I've put on the original roof. I want to redo it following the same approach that I took for the canopies and using smaller and thinner shingles. Cutting the original roof was not hard, but it hurt a bit. Not physically, just emotionally, because it was a lot of work to create the original version, and now I have to redo it. I have to admit that shingles and roofs are not my favorite thing. Alright, so here is roof version 2, following the same approach as for the canopies. I cut thinner foam and the shingles will be much smaller. There is one big mistake I've done here. I couldn't correct it and I didn't want to redo the roofs the third time, but probably in future buildings I will not do it. I've applied glue all over this slanted foam pieces that you see here, and I realized afterwards that glue and paint don't go together. Paint didn't stick to the glue, so if you look carefully between the final shingles, you are actually able to see some of the pink from the foam because the paint did not stick to it. So if I was to do it again, I would probably not do what I'm doing right now. I would try to glue. I'm trying to think here. Maybe I would cover the whole thing in black first and then apply glue, so that even if you can see through, you see black instead of pink. Because the shingles were kind of moving around on that glue, I used a few pins to hold them in place. Even though they poke holes through the shingles, that should not be an issue because the paint will cover all the imperfections. Here we are at the end of the first video. We're done with the buildings. They are not painted yet, but we are done with all the foam work. We still have to do a bit of foam work for the main, for the base of the diorama, but at this point you can kind of get an idea of how the final thing will look like. So stick around, watch the second part of the video to see how everything turns out. In the second part, you will be able to see how I painted the whole thing and how I created all the details. Take care. Goodbye.